Good evening, dear friends. I'm Edward Pembroke, your companion for tonight's Miss Marple Mystery. Before we begin, tell me, what's your craft or passion? Are you a teacher, an artist, a baker, or a quiet detective at heart? Drop it in the comments. I truly love discovering the wonderful people in our little mystery family. Now, make yourself comfortable, and let's step together into tonight's tale of secrets, whispers, and Miss Marple's brilliant mind. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Blackthorn Hollow. The train rattled through the English countryside, its wheels humming a steady rhythm against the tracks. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes tracing the rolling hills that gave way to the dense, shadowed outline of Blackthorn Hollow. It was October 1936, and the air carried the crisp bite of autumn. She was bound for Ashford Manor, the home of her old school friend, Lady Beatrice Ashford, whose recent letters had brimmed with an unusual urgency. "Come, Jane," Beatrice had written, "the village is restless, and I fear something dark is afoot." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her mind already turning over the cryptic words. Beatrice was not prone to dramatics, which made her plea all the more curious. As the train slowed, the station sign, Blackthorn Hollow, came into view, weathered and half obscured by ivy. The platform was nearly deserted, save for a young man in a tweed cap who took her suitcase with a curt nod. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm Roland Ashford, Beatrice's nephew. She's waiting at the manor." "Thank you, Mr. Ashford," Miss Marple replied, her smile polite but her eyes sharp, noting the young man's tense posture and the way his gaze darted toward the forest beyond the village. "It's a charming place, Blackthorn Hollow, though perhaps a touch sombre." Roland gave a short laugh. "Charming's one word for it. You'll see soon enough." He led her to a sleek Bentley, its polish at odds with the muddy lanes of the village. The drive to Ashford Manor revealed Blackthorn Hollow in glimpses. Stone cottages huddled along a winding road, a church spire piercing the grey sky, and the ever-present forest, its trees gnarled and looming. Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the villagers' furtive glances, their hushed conversations pausing as the car passed. Something was amiss, she thought, and it wasn't merely the chill of autumn. At the manor, Lady Beatrice greeted her with warmth that barely masked her unease. She was a tall woman, her silver hair elegant despite the lines of worry etched into her face. "Jane, you've come at last," she said, clasping Miss Marple's hands. "I'm so glad. Things here are unsettled." "Unsettled?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone gentle but probing. "Your letters hinted at trouble, Beatrice. Perhaps you might tell me more over tea." The drawing-room was grand with heavy drapes and a fire crackling in the hearth. Over tea, Beatrice recounted the village's latest scandal. Elsie Carter, a young maid from the manor, had vanished 3 nights ago during a moonless night. "She was a bright girl, Jane," Beatrice said, her voice low, "full of spirit. She left to visit her mother in the village and never arrived. No trace, no sign. It's as if the darkness swallowed her whole." Miss Marple's needles paused. "How curious. And this is not the first such incident, I gather." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "There have been others. Over the years, always on moonless nights. The villagers call it the curse of the dark. They say the forest takes people." "Nonsense," Roland interjected, striding into the room. His handsome face was set in a scowl. "Superstitious rot. Elsie probably ran off with some lad. Village girls do that." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Perhaps, Mr. Ashford. though it's odd, don't you think, that she left without her coat or wages? Young girls in love are impulsive, but rarely so impractical." Roland flushed, muttering something about checking the stables, and left abruptly. Beatrice sighed. He's been out of sorts since Elsie vanished. She was a favourite of his in a way. Before Miss Marple could press further, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper. Her grey hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her eyes were sharp, almost wary. "Begging your pardon, my lady," she said, "but the village is gathering at the church tonight. About Elsie. They're saying it's the curse again." Beatrice paled. "Thank you, Mrs. Grayson. We'll attend." As the housekeeper withdrew, Miss Marple noted the woman's lingering glance, as if measuring her. The church hall that evening was packed with villagers, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. The vicar, Mr. Penrose, a thin man with a nervous tic, stood at the pulpit. "We must remain calm," he urged, though his voice trembled. "Elsie's disappearance is tragic, but we mustn't give in to old tales." "Old tales?" a burly farmer, Mr. Hale, shouted from the crowd. "3 girls in 10 years, all gone in the dark. You call that coincidence, vicar?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Miss Marple sat quietly, her hands folded, but her mind catalogued every face, every word. A young woman with tear-streaked cheeks, Elsie's sister perhaps, clutched a shawl. A charismatic man in a tailored coat, introduced as Dr. Harrow, spoke soothingly to the crowd, his charm almost too polished. And in the shadows by the door, old Tom, the village eccentric, muttered about a watcher in the dark. As the meeting dissolved into heated arguments, Miss Marple leaned toward Beatrice. "This curse," she said softly, "seems to have a very human shape, don't you think?" Beatrice's eyes widened, but before she could reply, a scream pierced the night outside. The crowd surged to the windows, Miss Marple among them. In the churchyard, illuminated by a single lantern, a child pointed toward the forest. "I saw it," he cried, "a shadow, moving fast, toward the trees." The villagers fell silent, their fear palpable. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Shadows, she thought, were often cast by those who preferred to remain unseen, and she intended to find out who. "Before we move on, detective, where in the world are you solving mysteries with us? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're craving more twisted tales, hit subscribe. Tomorrow's case file gets even darker. Stay sharp." Chapter 2. The Moonless Night. The morning after the village meeting dawned grey and heavy. The sky over Blackthorn Hollow draped in clouds that seemed to press down on the rooftops. Miss Jane Marple sat in the conservatory of Ashford Manor, her knitting needles moving steadily as she listened to the patter of rain against the glass. Lady Beatrice, opposite her, stirred her tea absently, her brow furrowed. "Jane," Beatrice said at last, setting her cup down, "that scream last night, it's shaken everyone. The villagers are convinced it's the curse again. Even I'm beginning to wonder if there's something unnatural at work." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over her spectacles. "Unnatural, Beatrice. I find that human nature accounts for most mysteries, even the ones dressed in ghostly tales. Tell me, what do you know of this curse of the dark?" Beatrice sighed, glancing toward the window where the forest loomed, its edges blurred by mist. "It's an old story from my grandfather's time. They say the forest takes people, always on moonless nights, when the dark is thickest. No bodies are ever found, no traces. The villagers believe it's a spirit, a watcher, seeking vengeance for some forgotten sin." "How convenient," Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing. "A spirit that leaves no footprints is a fine excuse for a crime, don't you think? And Elsie Carter, What sort of girl was she? Bright, spirited, Beatrice replied. Not one to wander off without reason. She was saving her wages to marry, or so Mrs. Grayson said. Her mother lives at the edge of the village, near the forest path. Elsie was last seen taking that path home. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over the details. A young girl, a moonless night, a path by the forest. It was a pattern, and patterns, she knew, were rarely accidental. Determined to see the village for herself, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, ignoring Beatrice's protests about the rain. A little damp won't harm me, she said cheerfully. Besides, villages are remarkably talkative in the morning. She made her way to the high street, where the shops were just opening. At the post office, she lingered, pretending to fuss with a parcel while listening to the chatter. "How do you?" Postmistress, a stout woman with a sharp tongue, was holding court. "Elsie Carter's not the first, and won't be the last," she declared to a cluster of women. "Mark my words, it's the forest. My gran said it took her cousin back in '98. Same way, gone in the dark." "Superstition," sniffed a younger woman, clutching a basket. "Elsie was flighty. Probably ran off to London." Miss Marple smiled to herself. Flighty girls didn't vanish without their belongings, as Elsie had. She moved on to the butcher's, where she overheard Mr. Hale, the farmer from the meeting, arguing with a delivery boy. "I saw something that night," Hale was saying, his voice low but urgent. "Near the church, a shadow moving quick-like. Not a man, mind you. Too tall, too thin." The boy scoffed. "You've been at the cider, Mr. Hale." Hale's face reddened, and he stormed off. Miss Marple filed the exchange away, her interest piqued by Hale's insistence. Shadows, she thought, were often a matter of perspective. Her next stop was the church, where she found Mr. Penrose, the vicar, polishing the brass candlesticks with a nervous energy. He started at her approach, nearly dropping his cloth. "Miss Marple," he stammered, "what brings you here?" "Oh, just a whim," she said airily, her eyes scanning the dim interior. "I find churches so calming, don't you? Though I imagine you've had little peace since poor Elsie's disappearance." The vicar's tick twitched at the corner of his eye. "A tragedy," he said. "I've prayed for her, but the village, they're frightened. They talk of curses and spirits." "And what do you think, Mr. Penrose?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her gaze was sharp. He hesitated, his hands twisting the cloth. I think fear makes people see things that aren't there. Elsie was a good girl, but headstrong. Perhaps she wandered too far." "Perhaps," Miss Marple agreed, though her mind noted the vicar's unease, the way his eyes darted to a locked cabinet in the vestry. "You've lived here long, I suppose. Have there been many such vanishings?" "3 in my time," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "All young women, all on moonless nights. I keep records, you see, for the parish, but it's best not to dwell on such things." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "Of course. One mustn't let the past haunt the present." As she left the church, she passed Mr. Hale again, standing by the lich gate, his face grim. He was speaking to Dr. Harrow, who looked as polished as ever in his tailored coat. "I'm telling you, Doctor," Hale said, "I saw it. Near the forest, the night Elsie went missing. A figure cloaked, moving fast." Dr. Harrow clapped a hand on Hale's shoulder, his smile smooth. "My dear man, the mind plays tricks in the dark. Let's not feed the village's hysteria, eh?" Miss Marple lingered just out of sight, her umbrella tilted to shield her from view. Hale's story matched the child's from the previous night. A cloaked figure, a shadow in the dark. But Dr. Harrow's dismissal was too quick, too practiced. And the vicar's locked cabinet? What did it hold? As she walked back to the manor, the rain slackened, but the forest seemed to watch her, its branches swaying in the wind. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Legends were all very well, but she suspected the truth lay not in curses, but in the hearts of those who stood to gain from fear. Chapter 3. The Ashford Manor. The rain had ceased by the time Miss Jane Marple returned to Ashford Manor, though the air remained heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine from the nearby forest. Inside, the manor was a study in contrasts. Polished oak panelling gleamed under the chandelier's glow, yet shadows clung to the corners, as if reluctant to be banished. Miss Marple settled into the drawing-room, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes bright with curiosity. Lady Beatrice had promised a small gathering that evening to introduce her to the household, and Miss Marple was eager to observe its members. Beatrice entered, her elegance undimmed despite the strain in her expression. "Jane, you're a marvel to brave the village in such weather," she said, arranging herself on a velvet settee. "I've asked a few of the household to join us for sherry. I thought you'd like to meet them properly." "How thoughtful," Miss Marple replied, her smile mild but her mind alert. "A household is like a village in miniature, don't you think? So many little stories woven together." Before Beatrice could respond, the door opened, admitting Roland Ashford. His tweed jacket was slightly askew, and a faint flush coloured his cheeks, as if he'd hurried from some exertion. "Aunt Beatrice," he said, nodding curtly, "I hope this won't take long. I've matters to attend to." "Matters?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Really, Roland, you've been dashing about like a fox with hounds on its tail. Sit, do." Roland muttered something and took a chair, his fingers drumming on its arm. Miss Marple noted his restlessness, filing it away with his abrupt departure the previous day. Next came Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper, her movements precise as she carried a tray of sherry glasses. Her eyes flicked to Miss Marple, assessing before she offered a tight smile. "Good evening, Miss Marple. I trust you're finding Blackthorn Hollow diverting." "Oh, quite," Miss Marple said cheerfully. "There's nothing like a village to keep one entertained. So many comings and goings." Mrs. Grayson's smile faltered, but she said nothing, busying herself with the tray. The final arrival was Dr. Philip Harrow, whose easy charm filled the room like a warm breeze. His tailored suit and polished shoes spoke of city sophistication, yet his manner was perfectly at ease in the rural manner. "Miss Marple," he said, bowing slightly, "a pleasure. Beatrice has spoken so highly of you." "You're too kind, Doctor," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. "I understand you're the village's guardian of health, a weighty responsibility, especially in such unsettled times." Dr. Harrow's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Unsettled, yes. Poor Elsie's disappearance has everyone on edge. But I assure you, I'm doing all I can to keep spirits up." The conversation turned to village matters, but Miss Marple steered it gently toward Elsie Carter. "Such a pity about the girl," she said, her tone sympathetic. "I hear she worked here, Mrs. Grayson. Was she well liked?" Mrs. Grayson's hand paused as she poured sherry. "Well enough," she said curtly. "Elsie was diligent but headstrong, always chatting with the delivery boys, or that sister of hers. I warned her about wandering at night." "Warned her?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, inviting confidence. "How prudent! Did she often walk alone?" Mrs. Grayson hesitated, then nodded. "She insisted on visiting her mother most evenings. That path by the forest. It's not safe after dark." Roland snorted, reaching for his glass. "Safe or not, Elsie was no fool. If you ask me, she's halfway to London by now, chasing some daft dream." Beatrice frowned. "Roland, that's unkind. Elsie was devoted to her family." "Was she?" Dr. Harrow interjected smoothly. "I treated her once for a sprained wrist. Spirited girl, full of plans. But she did mention a young man. Someone from outside the village, perhaps." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "How interesting. Did she say more, Doctor?" Harrow shrugged, sipping his sherry. "Only that she hoped to marry soon. I didn't pry." The conversation shifted, but Miss Marple's attention lingered on Harrow's words. A young man, a secret romance. It was a thread worth pulling. After sherry, Beatrice suggested a tour of the manor, and Miss Marple seized the chance to explore. As they passed Elsie's old room in the servants' quarters, Beatrice paused. "Her things are still here," she said softly. "I couldn't bear to clear them out." "Might I see?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. The room was small but tidy, with a narrow bed and a wooden dresser. On the dresser lay a few personal items, a hairbrush, a ribbon, and a folded letter. Miss Marple, with Beatrice's permission, unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged. "Meet me at the Oak midnight. Don't tell a soul." J. Miss Marple murmured. "A lover, perhaps? Or someone else entirely?" Beatrice paled. "I had no idea. Elsie never spoke of anyone." As they returned to the drawing-room, Miss Marple's mind churned. A secret meeting, a moonless night, a vanished girl, and Dr. Harrow's casual mention of a suitor, too casual perhaps. She glanced at Mrs. Grayson, who was clearing the Ishira sherry glasses with a stiffness that suggested she'd overheard their discovery. Roland, meanwhile, had slipped out again, his absence conspicuous. That night, as Miss Marple sat by her bedroom window, the forest beyond seemed to pulse with secrets. The letter was a clue, but to what? A romance, a betrayal, or something darker? She thought of her own village, St. Mary Mead, where secrets hid behind every lace curtain. Blackthorn Hollow was no different, only its shadows were longer, and its secrets, she suspected, far more dangerous. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Village. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over Blackthorn Hollow. But the village seemed no less sombre for it. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a hearty breakfast at Ashford Manor, set out for the High Street, her sensible shoes tapping along the cobblestones. Her knitting bag swung lightly at her side, a comforting prop that allowed her to blend into the village's rhythm, while her eyes and ears missed nothing. She had a purpose today, to sift through the village's gossip and uncover the threads connecting Elsie Carter's disappearance to Blackthorn Hollow's shadowy past. The High Street was alive with morning activity. Women with baskets, men hauling crates, children darting between shops. Miss Marple made her way to the Blackthorn Inn, a weathered pub at the village's heart, where she suspected tongues wagged freely. Inside, the air smelled of ale and wood smoke, and a cluster of locals huddled near the bar, their voices low but animated. She settled at a corner table, ordering a pot of tea from the barmaid, a rosy-cheeked girl named Lily. "Such a quaint place," Miss Marple said, her smile inviting, "though I imagine it's been quieter since poor Elsie Carter vanished." Lily's eyes widened, and she leaned closer, her voice hushed. "Oh, it's dreadful, miss. Elsie was a friend, you know. Always laughing, always kind, but she wasn't the first. My ma says the forest's been taking girls for years." "Taking girls?" Miss Marple's tone was gently curious. "How many would you say?" Lily glanced around, then whispered, "3 in my lifetime, miss. All young, all spirited, Mary Dunn in 28, Sarah Wells in 32, and now Elsie, always on moonless nights, like the dark just swallows them." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she nodded. "How curious. And no one saw anything, no clues at all." "Not a one," Lily said, shaking her head. "Though Mr. Hale, he's the farmer up by the hill, he's been saying he saw a shadow the night Elsie went missing. Says it wasn't human." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Shadows again. The village was full of them, it seemed, both real and imagined. She thanked Lily and sipped her tea, her ears tuned to the conversations around her. At a nearby table, 2 older women were dissecting the village's woes. "It's the curse, I tell you," one said, her voice sharp. "Ever since Margaret Lyle vanished in 96, it's been the same. The forest, don't forget." Margaret Lyle. The name pricked Miss Marple's memory, though she couldn't place it. She made a mental note to inquire further. As she left the pub, she noticed a small crowd gathering near the village square, their voices raised. Curious, she approached, blending into the onlookers. At the centre stood Roland Ashford, his face flushed with anger, facing Mr. Hale, the farmer. "You're stirring up trouble, Hale," Roland snapped, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Spreading nonsense about shadows and curses. You'll have the whole village in a panic." Hale's eyes narrowed, his broad shoulders tense. "I know what I saw, Ashford. That night, near the forest path, a cloaked figure, tall, quick. You were out there too, weren't you? Coming back late, looking guilty as sin." Roland's jaw tightened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought he might strike the farmer. "Mind your tongue," he growled. "I was checking the manor's gates, nothing more. You'd do better to stop scaring folk with your tales." The crowd parted as Dr. Harrow stepped forward, his calm demeanour a stark contrast to the tension. "Gentlemen, please," he said, his voice smooth as polished glass. "This is no time for quarrels. We're all worried about Elsie. Let's focus on finding her, not chasing phantoms." Hale muttered something and stalked off, while Roland shot Harrow a dark look before turning away. Miss Marple watched closely, noting the way Harrow's smile lingered, as if he'd rehearsed it. She also noticed Lily, the barmaid, hovering at the edge of the crowd, her face pale as she stared at Roland. Back at the manor, Miss Marple shared her findings with Beatrice over luncheon. "The village is full of stories," she said, spreading butter on a scone. "This Margaret Lyle, do you know of her?" Beatrice's fork paused. "Vaguely. She was a local girl, vanished decades ago. There was talk of a scandal, something about a gentleman from the manor, my grandfather's cousin, I think. But it's ancient history. History has a way of lingering," Miss Marple said thoughtfully. "And these disappearances, Mary, Sarah, Elsie, they're all young women, all outspoken. It's a pattern, Beatrice, and patterns are rarely accidental." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You think someone's behind it? Not the curse?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle but firm. "I think curses are often a convenient mask for human mischief." "Tell me, was Roland really at the gates that night?" Beatrice hesitated. "He said so, but he's been so secretive lately. Always slipping out, avoiding questions. I don't know what to make of it." As they finished their meal, Miss Marple's mind turned over the day's discoveries. The pattern of vanishings, Roland's confrontation, Hale's cloaked figure, and the mysterious Margaret Lyle. The letter in Elsie's room, J at the Oak, nagged at her. Was J a person or a code? And why did Roland bristle at Hale's accusation? Outside the forest loomed, its shadows stretching toward the manor. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The village was whispering its secrets, and she was determined to listen. Chapter 5. The Forest's Edge. The afternoon light in Blackthorn Hollow was fading, casting long shadows from the ancient oaks that fringed the village. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the chill, had persuaded Lady Beatrice to accompany her on a walk to the forest's edge, where the path Elsie Carter had taken wound into the trees. Miss Marple's curiosity was piqued by the village's tales of accursed wood, and she suspected the truth lay not in legends, but in what the forest might reveal. Beatrice, bundled in a woolen coat, looked uneasy as they approached the path. "Jane, are you certain this is wise?" she asked, her voice low. "The villagers avoid this place, especially after Elsie." "Nonsense, Beatrice," Miss Marple replied, her tone brisk but kind. "A forest is only trees, and trees don't steal young women, but they may hold clues for those who look." Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, scanned the ground as they walked. The path was narrow, bordered by gnarled roots and underbrush. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of moss and decay. Miss Marple paused at a massive oak, its trunk scarred with strange carvings, spirals and crosses etched deep into the bark. "How curious," she murmured, tracing a symbol with a gloved finger. "These aren't natural. Someone took great care to make them." Beatrice shivered. "The villagers say they're old, from before the curse began. Offerings to keep the Watcher at bay." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Offerings or distractions? Marks like these can serve many purposes." She bent down, her keen eyes catching a glint in the grass. It was a small silver locket, half buried in the earth. She pried it open to reveal a tiny photograph of a young woman, not Elsie, but someone strikingly similar, with bold eyes and a defiant smile. "Beatrice, do you recognize her?" Miss Marple asked, holding out the locket. Beatrice frowned, peering at the photograph. I'm not sure. She looks like Elsie, but older. Perhaps one of the other girls who vanished, Mary or Sarah." Before Miss Marple could reply, a rustling in the underbrush made them both turn. A stooped figure emerged, an old man with wild white hair and a tattered coat, his eyes bright with an unsettling intensity. It was old Tom, the village eccentric, known for his ramblings about the forest. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, pointing a gnarled finger. "The Watcher sees all, and it don't like meddlers." Miss Marple, unfazed, smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Tom. We were just admiring the scenery. These carvings, are they your handiwork?" Tom's eyes narrowed. "Not mine. Older than me, older than the village. They mark the Watcher's territory. You found that locket, didn't you? It's hers, one of the lost." "Hers?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, inviting confidence. "Who do you mean?" Tom hesitated, his gaze darting to the trees. "Margaret Lyle. First to go, long ago. Her spirit's still here, calling the others. Elsie's with her now, mark my words." Beatrice gasped, but Miss Marple's expression remained calm. "How interesting. And have you seen this Watcher, Mr. Tom?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Seen it, I. Tall, cloaked, moving like smoke. Night Elsie vanished, I was by the path. Saw it glide toward the oak, the one you're standing by." Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for action. "Thank you, Mr. Tom. You've been most helpful." She pressed a shilling into his hand, and he shuffled off, muttering about the dark. As they returned to the village, the locket heavy in Miss Marple's pocket, a commotion greeted them. A crowd had gathered outside the dressmaker's shop, voices raised in panic. Lily, the barmaid, rushed toward them, her face ashen. "It's Clara!" she cried. "Clara Webb, the seamstress. She's gone, left her shop last night and never reached home. It's the curse again." Beatrice clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Another one, Jane. So soon. Miss Marple's lips pursed as she surveyed the crowd. Dr. Harrow was there, calming the villagers with his usual charm, while Roland stood apart, his face pale and his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Mr. Hale, the farmer, was shouting about shadows, his story eerily similar to Tom's. And in the doorway of the shop, Clara's apprentice wept, clutching a half-finished dress. "Beatrice," Miss Marple said quietly, "I think it's time we learned more about Margaret Lisle. And this oak, it seems to be at the heart of things." Her mind raced, connecting the locket, the carvings and the pattern of vanishings. Clara, like Elsie, was young and outspoken, last seen near the forest on a moonless night. The curse, she thought, was a clever disguise, but for what? As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple caught sight of Mrs. Grayson watching from across the street, her expression unreadable. The housekeeper turned away quickly, but not before Miss Marple noted the tightness of her jaw. Someone, she thought, was weaving a very careful web, and she intended to find the spider. Chapter 6. The Vicar's Secret. The Church of St. Agnes stood at the heart of Blackthorn Hollow, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Miss Jane Marple approached it the morning after Clara Webb's disappearance, her umbrella tucked under her arm, though the skies were clear. The village was abuzz with fear, and she sensed that answers lay not in the forest's shadows, but in the quieter corners of human affairs. Mr. Penrose, the vicar, had struck her as peculiarly nervous, and his locked cabinet in the vestry intrigued her. She intended to find out why. Inside, the church was cool and dim, the stained-glass windows casting muted colours across the pews. Mr. Penrose was at the altar, arranging hymnals with a fidgety precision. He started at the sound of Miss Marple's footsteps, his tick twitching at the corner of his eye. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice thin, "back so soon? I hope you're finding comfort here." "Oh, indeed," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "There's something so reassuring about a church, don't you think? Though I imagine it's been a trial for you, with the village so unsettled." Penrose's hands trembled as he set down a hymnal. "A trial, yes. Clara's disappearance has stirred things up. The villagers are difficult to console." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, settling into a pew. "Quite understandable. You mentioned keeping records of the vanishings. Might I see them? I find old parish documents so fascinating." The vicar's face paled, and he fumbled with his collar. "Records? Oh, they're nothing much. Just births, deaths, the usual. Hardly worth your time." "Even so," Miss Marple pressed, her tone gentle but firm. "They might shed light on poor Elsie and Clara. Patterns, you know, can be so revealing." Penrose hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well, they're in the vestry." He led her to the small room behind the altar, where a heavy oak cabinet stood against the wall. He unlocked it with a key from his pocket, revealing neatly bound ledgers. "These cover the last 50 years, he said, pulling out a volume, "but I warn you there's little to see." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed as she opened the ledger, her fingers tracing the entries. Births, marriages, deaths, all meticulously recorded, but the pages for 1928, 1932 and 1936 were oddly sparse. "How curious," she murmured. "The years Mary Dunn, Sarah Wells, and now Elsie vanished. There's barely a mention, and Clara's entry is missing altogether." Penrose's tic worsened. "An oversight," he stammered. "I've been preoccupied." "Of course," Miss Marple said kindly, though her mind noted the lie. She flipped to an older section, landing on 1896. There, in faded ink, was an entry for Margaret Lisle, listed as missing, presumed deceased. A brief note followed. Last seen near forest, moonless night. No witnesses. Tucked between the pages was a loose sheet, torn at the edges with a single line. M.L. met J at the oak. Trouble followed. J again, Miss Marple said softly, slipping the sheet back before Penrose could notice. This Margaret Lisle. She seems to haunt the village still. Penrose swallowed hard. An old tragedy, best forgotten. As they left the vestry, a commotion outside drew their attention. A young boy, breathless, burst into the church. "Vicar! Miss, it's happened again? A shadow. I saw it last night, near the churchyard, cloaked and tall, just like Mr. Hale said." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "How very interesting! And where exactly, my dear?" The boy pointed toward the churchyard's far gate, where the forest path began. "There, miss, moving toward the trees. I swear it wasn't human." Penrose's face drained of colour, and he muttered something about fetching the constable. Miss Marple, however, stepped outside, her eyes scanning the churchyard. The gate was ajar, and beyond it the forest loomed, its shadows thick even in daylight. She noticed a scrap of fabric caught on the gate's hinge. Dark wool, finely woven, not the sort a villager might wear. Tucking the fabric into her pocket, she returned to the manor, her mind racing. The vicar's missing records, the note about Margaret Lisle, the recurring J, and now another sighting of a cloaked figure. It was a puzzle, and Miss Marple loved puzzles. But the fabric suggested something new. Whoever was behind the vanishings had access to fine clothes, perhaps someone from the manor itself. At luncheon, Beatrice was pale, shaken by Clara's disappearance. "Jane, it's too much," she said. "2 girls in a week. The village is talking of leaving, abandoning Blackthorn Hollow altogether." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said briskly. "Running from shadows only makes them bolder. Tell me, Beatrice, does Roland often walk the churchyard at night?" Beatrice frowned. "I don't know. He's been so secretive. Why do you ask?" "Oh, just a thought," Miss Marple said airily, though her mind was far from idle. The vicar's evasions, the torn records, and the cloaked figure pointed to a secret carefully guarded. And that scrap of wool. It was too fine for a farmer, too costly for a villager. Someone, she thought, was playing a dangerous game, and she was determined to catch them at it. Chapter 7. Dr. Harrow's Charm. The village hall of Blackthorn Hollow was packed that evening, its air thick with the mingled scents of damp wool and paraffin lamps. The villagers had gathered at Dr. Philip Harrow's, urging to discuss the recent vanishings of Elsie Carter and Clara Webb, their fear palpable in the restless shifting of feet and hushed murmurs. Miss Jane Marple sat near the back, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, as she watched the doctor take the stage with the ease of a seasoned performer. Dr. Harrow was a striking figure, his tailored suit impeccable, his smile warm yet commanding. "My dear friends," he began, his voice smooth and resonant, "I know these are troubling times. Elsie and Clara's disappearances have shaken us all, but we must not give in to fear or superstition. Let us trust in reason and work together to find answers." The crowd quieted, drawn to his confidence, though Miss Marple noted a few sceptical glances. Mr. Hale, the farmer, among them, his arms crossed tightly. She also observed Lily, the barmaid, twisting her apron nervously, her eyes fixed on Harrow with an intensity that suggested more than admiration. "Reason," Mr. Hale muttered, loud enough to carry. "Easy for you to say, Doctor. You weren't out by the forest when Clara vanished. I saw that shadow again, cloaked, moving fast, same as before." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Harrow's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flicked to Hale with a fleeting sharpness. "My dear Mr. Hale," he said, "the night plays tricks on us all. Shadows are often just that, shadows. Let's focus on practical steps, searches, inquiries. I've already spoken to the constable about organising patrols." Miss Marple's needles paused. Practical steps indeed, but Harrow's dismissal of the shadow was too swift, too polished. She recalled the scrap of fine wool from the churchyard gate. Too fine for a farmer, perhaps just right for a doctor. "Dr. Harrow," she called out, her voice mild but clear. "You knew both Elsie and Clara, didn't you? As patients, I mean. Did they ever mention anything unusual? A fear, perhaps, or a secret?" The room turned to her, surprised by the gentle old lady's question. Harrow's smile tightened, just for a moment. "A perceptive question, Miss Marple," he said. "Both were healthy, spirited young women. Elsie spoke of a suitor, as I mentioned, but nothing alarming. Clara, well, she was quieter, but I recall no fears beyond the usual village gossip." "Gossip can be so revealing, though," Miss Marple said, her tone airy. "Young women often confide in their doctor, don't they?" Harrow chuckled, but it lacked warmth. "I'm flattered by your faith in my confidences, but I'm afraid I have none to share. My focus is on keeping this village calm." As the meeting dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, watching Harrow move through the crowd, shaking hands, offering reassurances. He paused by Lily, murmuring something that made her blush and look away. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Charm, she thought, was a powerful tool, sometimes too powerful. Back at Ashford Manor, she joined Beatrice for tea in the drawing-room, where Mrs. Grayson was clearing away the day's correspondence. The housekeeper's movements were brisk, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance of unease as she mentioned the meeting. "Dr. Harrow seems quite the pillar of the community," Miss Marple said casually, stirring her tea. "He must be a great comfort to you all, Mrs. Grayson." The housekeeper's hands stilled. "He's well liked," she said curtly. "Too well, perhaps. Some folk trust him more than they should." Beatrice frowned. "Mrs. Grayson, that's rather harsh. Dr. Harrow's been nothing but kind." Mrs. Grayson's lips thinned. "Kindness can cover a multitude of debts, my lady." She excused herself abruptly, leaving Miss Marple to ponder her words. "Debts," Beatrice echoed, puzzled. What could she mean? "Oh, people often speak in riddles when they're guarding secrets," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Mrs. Grayson strikes me as a woman who sees more than she says. And Dr. Harrow, well, he's very careful, isn't he? Always saying just enough." Beatrice leaned forward. "Jane, you don't suspect him, do you? He's been so good to the village." "I suspect everyone, my dear," Miss Marple replied lightly. "It saves time. Now tell me, did Elsie or Clara ever visit the manor together? Perhaps with Dr. Harrow?" Beatrice thought for a moment. "Not together, but Clara did come once to deliver a dress. She and Elsie chatted in the kitchen. Mrs. Grayson wasn't pleased, said they were gossiping about unsuitable matters." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Unsuitable matters. A cryptic note signed J. A doctor with a silver tongue, and a housekeeper's veiled warning. And then there was the locket from the forest, its photograph hauntingly similar to Elsie. She recalled the vicar's missing records and the name Margaret Lyle, tied to a scandal long ago. The pieces were forming a picture, but it was still blurred, like a reflection in a rippled pond. As she retired to her room, Miss Marple glanced out her window at the forest, its edges swallowed by dusk. Dr. Harrow's charm was a mask, she thought. But for what? And Mrs. Grayson's mention of debts. What did she know? The village was a web of secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to untangle it, one thread at a time. Chapter 8. The Hidden Room. The corridors of Ashford Manor were silent in the late morning, save for the soft creak of floorboards under Miss Jane Marple's careful steps. The house, with its high ceilings and faded grandeur, seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding secrets in its very walls. Miss Marple, ever attuned to such subtleties, had decided to explore the manor's upper floors, while Beatrice was occupied with household accounts. The cryptic clues, the locket, the note signed J, Mrs. Grayson's mention of debts, and the vicar's missing records had set her mind buzzing. Somewhere in this house, she suspected, lay answers. She moved through the second-floor gallery, her eyes scanning the portraits of stern-faced Ashford's past. A faint draught caught her attention, coming from a panel near a dusty bookcase. Miss Marple's lips twitched with interest. In her experience, old houses like this one often hid their secrets behind false walls. She pressed gently on the panel, and with a soft click it swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into shadow. "Dear me," she murmured, her curiosity outweighing caution. She lit a small oil lamp from the hall and descended, her steps cautious but resolute. The staircase led to a small, windowless room, its air thick with the musty scent of time. A rickety table stood in the centre, covered with a jumble of papers, photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings. A single chair, its cushion worn, suggested someone had spent time here, perhaps recently. Miss Marple set the lamp down and began to examine the contents. The clippings were old, dating back to 1896, and all concerned Margaret Lyle's disappearance. One headline read, "Village Girl Vanishes Near Forest, Scandal Rumoured." Another article hinted at a connection to the Ashford family, mentioning a gentleman of the manor whose name was carefully omitted. The photographs were more telling. One showed a young woman with bold eyes, unmistakably the same face as in the locket from the forest. Margaret Lyle, Miss Marple thought, her heart quickening. Among the papers was a handwritten letter, its ink faded but legible. It read, "Margaret, meet me at the Oak, midnight, we'll settle it." J. The same J as Elsie's note, Miss Marple noted, her mind racing. Another document caught her eye, a ledger page listing payments from the Ashford estate to an unnamed recipient, dated 1896, with the word "silence" scrawled in the margin. As she sifted through the papers, a creak from the staircase made her freeze. She extinguished the lamp and slipped behind a dusty curtain just as footsteps descended. The dim light of a candle revealed Mrs. Grayson, her face taut with purpose. The housekeeper glanced around, her eyes lingering on the table, then moved to a small chest in the corner. She unlocked it with a key from her apron and withdrew a bundle of letters, tucking them under her arm before hurrying back upstairs. Miss Marple waited until the footsteps faded, then emerged, her mind alight. Mrs. Grayson's secrecy confirmed her suspicions. The housekeeper knew more than she let on. The hidden room, with its trove of clues, linked Margaret Lyle's vanishing to the present, and the Ashford family was at the heart of it. But what was J settling, and why the payments for silence? Returning to the main house, Miss Marple found Beatrice in the drawing-room, looking pale. "Jane, you've been wandering," Beatrice said, managing a weak smile. "I hope the manor's not too dreary." "Oh, it's full of surprises," Miss Marple replied airily, her eyes twinkling. "Beatrice, do you recall any family stories about 1896? A scandal, perhaps, involving your grandfather's cousin?" Beatrice frowned, thinking. "Vaguely. There was talk of a cousin Edward, I think, who left for America suddenly. Something about a girl. But it was hushed up. Why do you ask?" Just idle curiosity, Miss Marple said, though her mind was far from idle. She changed the subject, asking about Roland's whereabouts. He's been so elusive, she added. Beatrice sighed. He's out again, something about the estate boundaries. He's been like this since Elsie vanished. I'm worried, Jane. As they spoke, Roland burst into the room, his coat mud-splattered, his expression stormy. Aunt, Beatrice, that fool Hale is at it again, spreading tales in the village. Says he saw the cloaked figure last night, near the church. It's madness. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. How distressing, she said. And where were you last night, Mr. Ashford? Checking the gates again. Roland's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Only that you seem to be out often, Miss Marple said mildly. One wonders for what keeps you so busy. He muttered something and stormed out, leaving Beatrice shaken. Miss Marple patted her hand. Don't fret, my dear. People reveal themselves in time. Alone later, Miss Marple turned the clues over in her mind. The hidden room, Margaret Lyle's photograph, the payments for silence, and Mrs. Grayson's secret letters. The cloaked figure, seen again, suggested someone was actively fueling the curse's legend. And Roland's temper, did it hide guilt or merely frustration? The web was tightening, and Miss Marple was determined to find its centre. Chapter 9. The Third Disappearance. The village of Blackthorn Hollow awoke to a fresh wave of dread, the news spreading like wildfire through the cobblestone streets. Rose Tanner, the young schoolteacher, had vanished. She had been last seen leaving the schoolhouse the previous evening, her satchel slung over her shoulder, heading toward the village square. It was another moonless night, and the whispers of the curse of the dark grew louder, more insistent. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the breakfast table in Ashford Manor, listened as Lady Beatrice relayed the grim tidings, her hands trembling around her teacup. Rose, of all people, Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was so sensible, so kind. The children adored her. How could this happen, Jane? 3 girls in a month. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her calm demeanour a stark contrast to Beatrice's distress. It's troubling indeed, she said, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. But 3 vanishings in so short a time suggests more than chance. Tell me, Beatrice, what was Rose like? Beatrice dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Quiet but firm, with a quick mind. She wasn't one for gossip, unlike some. She'd been teaching here only a year, but she was well respected. I saw her at the village hall meeting, speaking with Dr. Harrow. She seemed preoccupied. Miss Marple's interest piqued. Preoccupied? Did she say anything to you? No, but she asked me about the manor's history once. Something about old families and their secrets. I thought it was just scholarly curiosity. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Rose, like Elsie and Clara, was young and outspoken in her own way, a pattern that refused to be ignored. She excused herself from breakfast and made her way to the village, determined to learn more. The square was a hive of activity, with villagers gathered in knots, their voices a mix of fear and anger. Lily, the barmaid, stood near the schoolhouse, her face tear-streaked as she spoke to a small crowd. "It's the curse," Lily cried, clutching her shawl. Rose was careful, always home before dark. But last night she stayed late, grading papers, and now she's gone, just like Elsie and Clara. Miss Marple approached, her tone gentle. "A terrible loss, Lily. Did Rose ever mention anything unusual? A visitor, perhaps, or a worry?" Lily sniffed, shaking her head. "Not to me, miss, but she was reading old books lately, about the village, the forest. Said something about a circle that used to meet here years ago. I didn't think much of it." "A circle?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, inviting confidence. "What sort of circle?" Lily shrugged. "Dunno, miss. She said it was secret like a club. Old families, maybe. She found it in some dusty records at the school." Miss Marple's mind raced. A secret society tied to the village's past could explain much. The payments for silence in the hidden room, the recurring vanishings, the name Margaret Lyle. She thanked Lily and moved toward the schoolhouse, where the constable was questioning a few children. One girl, no older than 10, tugged at Miss Marple's sleeve. "Miss, I saw something last night," she whispered. "A man near the school, watching Miss Tanner. He was in a cloak, like the stories." Miss Marple knelt, her eyes kind but probing. "Did you recognize him, dear?" The girl shook her head. "It was too dark, but he was tall, and he moved fast toward the forest." Another cloaked figure, Miss Marple thought, her lips pursing. She thanked the child and made her way back to the manor, where she found Roland pacing the drive, his face pale and his hands clenched. He started at her approach, his eyes darting nervously. "Mr. Ashford," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, "you seem out of sorts. I trust you've heard about Rose Tanner." Roland's jaw tightened. "Whole village is talking about it. Another girl gone, and they're all looking at me like I'm to blame. I was here last night, checking the stables." "Of course," Miss Marple said, though her eyes noted the mud on his boots, fresh and clinging, as if from a recent walk. "It must be trying, with all this talk of shadows and curses. Have you ever heard of a circle in Blackthorn Hollow? A secret group, perhaps?" Roland's face went still, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of alarm. "No idea what you're talking about," he snapped, turning on his heel and striding toward the house. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind turning over the new clues. A secret circle, Rose's interest in the village's history, and Roland's growing agitation. Each piece fit into the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. She thought of the hidden room, the payments for silence, and the locket with Margaret Lyle's face. And now a third disappearance, with another sighting of a cloaked figure. The village was teetering on the edge of panic, and Miss Marple knew time was short. Back in her room, she examined the scrap of wool from the churchyard gate, comparing it to the memory of Roland's coat. It was close, but not quite a match. Dr. Harrow's tailored suits, however, were another matter. And Mrs. Grayson's hidden letters, what secrets did they hold? As the forest loomed beyond her window, Miss Marple's resolve hardened. The vanishings were no curse, but a carefully woven scheme, and she was determined to expose its maker. Chapter 10. The Curse. Unravelled. The air in Blackthorn Hollow carried a biting chill as Miss Jane Marple made her way toward the village's edge, where the forest loomed like a silent sentinel. The third disappearance, Rose Tanner's, had plunged the village into a state of near hysteria, with whispers of the curse of the dark now shouted openly in the streets. Miss Marple, however, remained unruffled, her mind a whirl of connections. The hidden room's secrets, the name Margaret Lyle, the mysterious J, and the recurring sightings of a cloaked figure. She was determined to unravel the legend's roots, and she suspected old Tom, the village eccentric, knew more than his ramblings suggested. She found him near the forest path, sitting on a stump, whittling a stick with a rusty knife. His wild white hair caught the morning light, and his eyes, sharp despite their clouded appearance, fixed on her as she approached. "Back again, miss," he said, his voice rough, but tinged with amusement. "You're a bold one. poking at the dark." Miss Marple smiled, settling on a nearby log, her knitting bag at her side. "I find the dark rather illuminating, Mr. Tom. You've lived here a long time, haven't you? Long enough to know the truth behind this curse." Tom's knife paused, and he squinted at her. Truth's a slippery thing in Blackthorn Hollow. Folk prefer stories to facts, but you're not like them, are you? "Not entirely," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "You mentioned Margaret Lisle before, and a watcher in the dark. I think you know more than you say. Tell me, what happened in 1896? Tom's gaze darted to the forest, then back to her. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Margaret was my sister's friend, bold as brass, always asking questions. She was sweet on a gentleman, Edward Ashford from the manor, but he was promised to another, a rich lady. Margaret found out something she shouldn't, a secret about the Ashfords and their money. Next thing, she's gone. Met someone at the Oak, they said, and never came back." Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, seemed to hum with anticipation. A secret about money? And this Jay, was that Edward? Tom shook his head. Not Edward. Someone else. Someone close to the family. I saw them that night, arguing by the Oak. Margaret was angry, waving a letter. Then the dark took her. His voice cracked and he looked away. I was young, too scared to speak, but I've watched ever since, waiting for the watcher to slip. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was razor-sharp. You've been very brave, Mr. Tom, keeping watch all these years. These carvings on the trees, your work to mark the spot? He nodded, almost shyly. To remember her, and to warn others. But it don't stop the vanishing. Elsie, Clara, Rose, they're all like Margaret. Too curious, too bold. Miss Marple patted his hand. You've helped more than you know. One last thing. Have you seen this cloaked figure lately? Near the manor, perhaps? Tom's eyes narrowed. Aye, 2 nights ago, near the churchyard. Tall, quick, like before. But it weren't no spirit. It moved like a man, one who knows the paths. She thanked him and pressed a coin into his hand, her mind racing as she returned to the manor. Margaret Lisle's disappearance was no curse, but a cover for a scandal, likely tied to the Ashford family's wealth. The payments for silence in the hidden room, the letters signed J, and now Rose's interest in the village's history. It all pointed to a secret preserved through fear. But who was J, and why strike now? At the manor, Beatrice was in the drawing room, looking drawn. Jane, the village is in chaos, she said. They're talking of burning the forest to end the curse. I'm afraid for Roland. He's been so erratic, and people are whispering about him. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Roland does seem troubled. But tell me, Beatrice, was your grandfather's cousin Edward ever linked to a group, a circle, perhaps, of influential families? Beatrice frowned. I've heard rumours of such a thing long ago. A sort of club, landowners, gentry. My grandfather mentioned it once, said it was disbanded after a scandal. Why? Just a thought, Miss Marple said airily, though her mind was piecing together the puzzle. A secret society, a scandal involving Margaret Lisle, and a cloaked figure maintaining the myth of a curse. Roland's muddy boots, Dr. Harrow's charm, Mrs. Grayson's letters. All were threads in a web, and she suspected the centre was close. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple caught sight of Mrs. Grayson passing the doorway, her arms full of linens. The housekeeper's eyes met hers. And for a moment, Miss Marple saw a flicker of fear. Someone was guarding the past, she thought. and they were growing careless. The next moonless night was approaching, and Miss Marple knew she must act before the Watcher claimed another. Chapter 11. The Night of Truth. The moonless night hung heavy over Blackthorn Hollow, the sky a vast inky void that seemed to press down on Ashford Manor. Inside, the drawing-room glowed with the soft light of oil lamps, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Miss Jane Marple had persuaded Lady Beatrice to host a small gathering, ostensibly to calm the village's fears, but her true purpose was sharper, to set a trap for the one weaving the web of disappearances. She sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles idle for once, her eyes bright as she surveyed the assembled guests. Beatrice, pale but composed, presided over the room. Roland Ashford lounged by the fireplace, his expression sullen, a glass of brandy in hand. Dr. Philip Harrow stood near the window, his charm undimmed despite the tension, while Mrs. Grayson moved silently, serving tea with her usual precision. Mr. Penrose, the vicar, fidgeted in a corner, his tic more pronounced than ever. Mr. Hale, the farmer, and Lily, the barmaid, had been invited at Miss Marple's insistence, their presence adding a spark to the charged atmosphere. "Thank you all for coming," Beatrice began, her voice steady. "With poor Rose Tanner gone, and Elsie and Clara before her, we must face this together. Miss Marple has some thoughts to share." Miss Marple smiled, her tone gentle but commanding attention. "Indeed, I've been listening to the village's stories, and they tell a tale not of curses, but of human hands. These vanishings, Elsie, Clara, Rose, are linked to an older tragedy, that of Margaret Lisle in 1896. A scandal, I believe, involving the Ashford family, and a secret kept at great cost." Roland's glass clinked sharply against the mantel. "What's this nonsense?" he snapped. "You're stirring up old ghosts, Miss Marple." "Oh, ghosts are rarely the trouble, Mr. Ashford," she replied mildly. "But secrets, those can be dangerous. Margaret Lisle met someone at the Oak, signed J, and vanished. Payments were made for silence, recorded in a hidden room here in the manor. And now young women are disappearing again, all on moonless nights, all near the forest." Dr. Harrow's smile was tight. "A fascinating theory, Miss Marple, but surely you don't believe this J is still at work. It's been 40 years. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Not the same person, perhaps, but the same motive? Greed or fear of exposure? "You treated all 3 girls, Doctor. Did they ever mention a secret society? A circle of influential families, perhaps?" Harrow's composure faltered, just for a moment. "I'm a doctor, not a keeper of secrets. They spoke of village life, nothing more." Lily, trembling, spoke up. "That's not true. Rose told me she found papers in the schoolhouse, about a circle, old families like the Ashfords. She said Dr. Harrow asked her to keep quiet about it." The room tensed, all eyes on Harrow. He laughed, but it was strained. "Lily, you're upset. Rose was curious, yes, but it was harmless research." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Harmless? Yet Rose is gone, like Elsie and Clara. And then there's the cloaked figure, seen by Mr. Hale, a child, and old Tom. A figure in fine wool, Doctor, like the scrap I found, at the churchyard gate. Your coats are rather fine, aren't they?" Harrow's face hardened. "You're reaching, Miss Marple. I've done nothing but help this village. Help or control?" Miss Marple's voice was soft but piercing. "I made inquiries, you see. In London, before you came here, you were dismissed from a hospital under suspicion of blackmail. Patients' secrets, sold for profit. Curious, isn't it, that you arrived in Blackthorn Hollow just before